Guten Tag, wir sind auf dem Weg zum Meeting der American Academy of Forensic Sciences und wir haben ein Problem. Wir haben ein Problem.
Ja, das sah jetzt gerade sehr beeindruckend aus, wie die Wand herangerollt ist an Schneesturm. Hast du schon erzählt, dass wir eine allgemeine Warnung bekommen haben?
Auf allen Handys im gesamten Flughafen hat jeder, anders als in Deutschland, eine Warnung bekommen, dass ein Snow Avalanche oder irgendwas ankommt, also eine Schneewand. Ja. Schon eindrucksvoll.
Ein Schneesturm.
Schneesturm, wenn alle Handys mal so gleichzeitig piepsen. Jetzt sind wir mal gespannt. Draußen sieht es schon ziemlich trüb aus, aber mal sehen.
Ja, aber eben war es noch komplett klar mit Sonnenschein.
Ja, man hat Wölkchen am Himmel gesehen, so. Wirklich. Also einfach ganz normales.
Innerhalb von Minuten sah es jetzt so aus.
Immer ist was. Immer ist was. Wirklich, immer ist was. Ja. Da hinten sind noch die letzten Reste des schönen Wetters zu sehen. Das ist aber jetzt hier deutlich erkennbar von Schneeflocken und irgendwas anderem überlagert wird. Aber immerhin, da hinten ist es nicht. Auf der Welt natürlich auch noch andere und größere Probleme. Beispielsweise meldet die New York Post, dass wir on the brink of war sind. Das ist eigentlich immer so. Wenn ich in Amerika bin, ist immer irgendein Krieg. Nicht lustig gemeint, sondern ernst gemeint. Ich mache da jedes Mal Fotos von. Irgendwo ist immer irgendein Krieg. Zweimal im Irak, Afghanistan. Immer ist irgendwas. Und der Präsident, Biden ist das im Moment, sagt, Putin decided to invade. So, der Sturm wird doch etwas ernster. Wie ihr sehen könnt, hier ist also kein Signal mehr. Es kommen nur noch so Wildfragmente kommen hier an. Wow. Das ist eigentümlich. Vielleicht wird man es noch Sorgen machen. Ach, du hast die Warnung gerade. Die Ines hat schon wieder die Warnung, zeig mal. Notfallbenachrichtigung, schwerwiegend. Fuck me.
Also es war eine zweite Warnung jetzt.
Das ist die zweite Warnung, also es. Naja. Ich sag nix.
No, I don't know. My dad should be calling the doctor.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Kelly on United Flight 1190 with service to Los Angeles. Then we will start the recommend to please proceed to your flight immediately. Get marked C102.
Hier im Buchladen findet man neben Kurt Cobain auch John Lennon und Roy Orbison und die Beatles aus irgendeinem Grund. Also die Beatles sind irgendwie größer als Kurt Cobain hier. Ich bin ja schon in vielen Städten auf der Welt gewesen und auch vielen gefährlichen Städten, auch Chicago, als es wirklich bitter war, New York und ein paar andere Städte. Aber was hier besonders ist, mitten in der Stadt, also mitten in einer Einkaufszone, ist alles tot. Macy's, alles tot. Gibt es nicht mehr, leergeräumt, Läden geschlossen seit über einem Jahr wegen Corona. Jetzt ist Februar 2022. Gleichzeitig ist überall sieht man im Hintergrund hier die schicken Gebäude und alles, ne? Also Hochhäuser ohne Ende und so. Es sind Massen von Obdachlosen, Menschen mit auffälligen psychischen Erkrankungen, die mit ihren Wägen durch die Gegend schieben. Sowas habe ich echt noch nicht erlebt. Man muss dazu wissen, das hier ist der touristische Hotspot. Also bei Google steht drin, was steht drin? Alles.
Ja, das ist immer, Google macht immer gelbe Markierungen für touristisch interessante Regionen. Und das ist eigentlich eine touristisch interessante Region. Hier ist auch das Seattle Art Museum, die Gumball.
Also sehr, sehr ungewöhnlich. Und wir reden hier von richtig harten Drogen, die hier unterwegs sind. Das sind nicht einfach nur Leute mit Psychosen, die auf der Straße gelandet sind, weil das Sozialsystem sie nicht aufgreift, sondern hier reden wir wirklich von, weiß ich,
Hier gibt es ja kein Auffangnetz.
Crack oder sonst irgendwas. Ja. Die Toiletten hier im Kongresszentrum sind sehr interessant. Damit die Substanzabhängigen hier nicht ihre Substanzen zu sich nehmen können, ist es hier alles offen. Wohlgemerkt, wir sind hier im Kongresszentrum der Stadt. So, jetzt geht's los. Bist du aufgeregt?
Nein, wie immer. Du bist aufgeregt, wenn du fragst, wann ich bin, ob ich aufgeregt bin.
Postet hier drunter, wer aufgeregt ist. So, es ist ja noch ein Tag vorher. Hier könnt ihr sehen, hier sind ein Internetcafé. Das ist das Internetcafé mit einem Drucker. Das ist natürlich ziemlich cool. Und wir orientieren uns natürlich erst. Aber ihr könnt schon sehen, das ist eine ganz andere Dimension von Kongress, als man das aus Deutschland kennt.
I won?
Okay, yes.
Okay, ready?
Okay, now I get my... This is typical in the United States. You get... How do you call them?
What does it say? Celebrate diversity.
No, the ribbons. These are the
Oh,
ribbons.
yes.
So we celebrate diversity. What else do we have? I'm an international attendee, a member of Path Biology section, and a fellow. Yeah. All right, I got another ribbon. That's the Moderator Ribbon. That means that I'm going to moderate a scientific session. The only question is what celebrate diversity means, because I remember last time that was the Celebrate Diversity thing was kind of hidden. It was only for people from the Anthropology section, and it was handed out under the table. But this time it's something official. So we are celebrating diversity. Etwas anderes sehr Ungewöhnliches ist die schweigende Auktion. Das heißt, man steigert, man weiß aber nicht, wie viel die anderen Leute gesteigert haben. Und da gibt es hier unter anderem einen Schal. Also da hat jemand einen Schal gemacht und der wird dann gespendet und dann, wenn ihn jemand will, dann kriegt man den. Man kann aber auch so ein Riesenpaket mit Werbematerial von der American Academy of Forensic Sciences kriegen.
Du musst bei dem Schal noch dazu sagen, es ist extra so gemacht, dass von einer Seite sieht man ein DNA-Muster.
Ach ja, okay, das sollte man vielleicht mal zeigen.
Deswegen ist das.
AirPods gibt es auch. Die sind gerade, es ist jetzt 2022, die sind gerade heiße Scheiße. Also hier ist ein DNA-Muster drauf zu erkennen.
Steht da zumindest?
Steht da, nee, man kann das schon, ja doch, man kann das schon erkennen.
Du? Ja.
Innerlich.
Ja, innerlich.
We are here at the sales booth where you can buy, for example, pocket lights, flashlights, beautiful coins, baseball caps too. I want to show you the baseball cap. But the best thing is that one of the people here do you like the baseball cap?
Ja, das gefällt mir ganz viel. Ja, schaut sehr super aus.
Das schaut sehr super aus. How come that you speak fluently German? That's unusual.
Ja, ich war in Deutschland geboren und da war ich für 12 Jahren, dann bin ich nach den US gekommen mit meinem Vater.
Why did you leave beautiful Germany? They don't have baseball caps there, right?
Richtig, das war mein Vater war in der amerikanischen Armee und dann meine Mutti war deutsch.
What's your favorite dish, German dish? That you can recommend? Cheesecake, you would consider that to be American, probably.
Ja.
Pretzels, that's New York.
Für mich ist es immer Sauerbraten oder Schweinehaxen.
How about gummy bears?
Ja, die sind okay.
But it's Sauerbraten,
eine Bienenstich.
Hallo, eine Besonderheit in den USA, anders als in Luxemburg, Deutschland, Österreich, der Schweiz ist, es gibt Merch. Also wenn ihr auf einen Kongress geht, dann könnt ihr Glück haben, dass es Merch gibt. Zum Beispiel dieses Visitenkarten-Etui, da könnt ihr eure Visitenkarten reintun. Oder es gibt ein Schnapsgläschen, da könnt ihr dann Schnaps draus trinken. Es gibt eine Münze, da sind alle Bereiche drauf, zum Beispiel forensische Leichenzahnkunde, Rechtskunde, Psychiatrie, forensisches Engineering, Erbsubstanzkunde, das ist ein Money Clip, da kann man Geld reintun. Hier seht ihr eine Bookmark, also da kann man die Buchseite, die man aufgeschlagen hat, man kann ein Lesezeichen. Hier seht ihr eine Mütze, Ines ist nicht begeistert, ich habe schon zwei Baseballcaps gekauft.
Ich hasse Baseballkappen.
Und das Beste ist, hier gibt es einen Schal, wenn ihr genau hinguckt, könnt ihr sehen, da ist ein DNA-Muster drin. Den finde ich sehr, sehr geil.
Angeblich, also wird sogar hier gesagt. Also wenn man sich
das ist aber kein Merch, sondern den kann man nur ersteigern. Das ist alles nicht so ganz einfach. Leider ist man immer noch darauf angewiesen, hier alles auf Papier zu machen, weil die App nicht funktioniert. Aber gut, ihr seht schon, es sind hier wirklich Dutzende von Veranstaltungen und Lagepläne. Das ist gut, wenn man da vorher schon da ist und sich das alles mal anguckt. Unser erster Tag auf dem Kongress ist mit Organisieren vorbei und hier im Hintergrund seht ihr die Menschen, die den Hochzeitskongress geplant haben. Die sind auch fertig für heute und bringen hier ihre Hochzeitsmaterialien weg. Torten, Blumen, Hochzeitskleider. mitten in Seattle, also wirklich mitten in Seattle, da wo Macy's, das Kaufhaus, was gerade leer steht und zahlreiche Hochhäuser sich befinden und merkwürdige kreisförmige Turmhäuser, ist die Monorail. Könnt ihr hier oben sehen. Die Monorail war, glaube ich, ein Experiment. Wurde in mehreren Ländern natürlich mal versucht. Als Magnetschwebebahn und vieles mehr. Und wir gucken uns jetzt mal hier diese Monorail an. Nicht viel los. Wo geht's jetzt hier? Ah, da. Nach längerem Hin und Her haben wir es gefunden. Jetzt müssen wir erstmal ein Ticket kaufen. Ziemlich cool, ja.
Welcome to Seattle Center Monorail. Please take a seat or hold on to the handrail. All passengers are required to wear a mask in station and on board the train. To protect those around you, please make sure your mask is properly covering your mouth and nose. When possible, maintain 6 feet of social distancing from others. Thank you for your cooperation.
Hast du gehört? Welcome, welcome oder irgend sowas hat er gesagt.
Welcome on board.
Welcome to Orca, welcome on board.
Welcome to Orca.
Welcome, welcome.
Ich denke mal, welcome on board.
Welcome on board.
Ein bisschen genuschelt.
Super Science Fiction, oder?
Ja, finde ich auch. Aber es ist wenn man drin sitzt, ist es nicht so Science Fiction, weil es ganz schön rattert.
Es rumpelt. Ja, jetzt kommen wir gerade von der Tagung der...
Das Fahrrad ist schon weg.
Hier ist natürlich direkt eine Crime Scene. Nee. Also es ist wirklich, also der Gewaltlevel hier, der ist wirklich unfassbar. Es ist jetzt einen Tag später. Und wir stehen schon wieder vor dem nächsten riesen Polizeieinsatz. Also hier ist wirklich...
Wir sind noch eine Station gefahren.
Wir sind noch eine Station im Bus gefahren. Also hier ist wirklich was nicht in Ordnung. Muss man leider echt sagen.
Endstation.
Krass, ey. Echt unfassbar. Ohne Scheiß, in Manhattan war deutlich weniger Gewalt, Kriminalität, Drogenmissbrauch, Polizeieinsätze und sonst was zu sehen als hier in Seattle. Also es ist nahezu unmöglich, irgendwie hier nicht an was vorbeizulaufen, was in Deutschland direkt 2 Tage in der Zeitung stehen würde. Ines, du hast gerade die super Idee gehabt, hier bei der Ausstellung, bei der kriminaltechnischen Tagung, ein rotes Getränk. Wonach schmeckt's?
Ja, ich bin mir jetzt nicht mehr sicher, ob es ein rotes Getränk sein soll oder doch irgendwelches Mittel, womit man irgendwelche forensische Dinge machen soll.
Wir waren gerade beim Stand, wo wir ein Spermaspray, ein Spermaentdeckungsspray gemacht haben. Das sieht ja eher wie Blut aus. Beschreib mal, welche Geschmäcker du da schmeckst.
Eigentlich eher Plastik, deswegen bin ich mir jetzt nicht so sicher.
Nur Plastik, Süßstoff, Wasser?
Nein, probier doch mal, es schmeckt doch gut.
Ich werde doch nicht auf der Tagung, auf der Jahrestagung der Rechtsmediziner, Kriminalbiologen, Kriminalchemiker und so weiter, werde ich doch kein rotes Getränk auf Eis würfeln. Nee.
Ja, ich bin nicht sicher. Ich habe keine Ahnung, was es sein könnte.
Falls ihr eine Idee habt, was es sein könnte, postet es hier drunter. Forensics means to be specialized. Here is a specialist. What is your name?
My name is Helen Brandt-Latavik.
Hello, Helen. So you're a specialist for the surfaces of joints, as I understand it. Please explain.
So essentially in my research here, I'm looking at the sacroiliac joint specifically.
Where are they?
In the hips.
The hip joint.
The hip joint that connects basically your torso to your legs. And so I'm looking at the similarity of the joint surfaces in order to say, can we identify if the joints to their surfaces are too dissimilar to say they come from the same person, or are they potentially similar enough to identify that, yes, they're from the same person.
So how many points did you measure? It looks like many points.
So this one, I use the curve tool. So a curve has 3 points in it. So I put 8 curves around it, so 24 points. And so I can use that to then compare with, this is the pelvis, compare with the sacrum, and then show that they're either similar enough to potentially say they came from the same person, or dissimilar enough to say that we can maybe exclude it as a potential match.
So that is probably not a problem in a hospital, so you're applying that elsewhere, I imagine.
Yes, to commingled human remains.
So, for example, mass graves? Or...
Yes, exactly. Mass graves, it has bioarchaeological applications as well. Essentially in any circumstance where you're not sure, if you're trying to exclude potential matches and saying that this pelvis came from this person or not, especially in forensic anthropology, this is really useful in reducing the number of samples you need to submit for DNA analysis, which can be very expensive. So it's a lot easier to be able to reduce the number of matches and then submit for identification later.
Why did you decide for this particular joint? Because there are many joints in the human body. Let's say you have a mass grave or something.
Right, and this is only one of the joints, sure. So this method works best on joint surfaces that are similar in shape. So the sacrum has this L-shaped auricular surface, just like in the pelvis. So that's why I chose that for this method. I'm also going to be expanding this for my dissertation and using the first tarso-metatarsal joint and then the
Where is that?
In the foot. And then the atlantoaxial joint, which is one of the joints in the neck, both of which have similar surfaces between the two bones. So if I use something like the shoulder joint with your humeral head being round and the glenoid fossa being kind of teardrop shaped, they're very different shapes. So all this would tell me is that the two shapes are too dissimilar. So I needed two shapes that were essentially the same shape so that I can analyze how similar they are.
Do you need clean bones, or can you also do that on a, I don't know, CT or MRT or something like that?
I could use a CT scan, certainly. I wouldn't use bones that hadn't been processed or at least were able to be looked at radiographically.
You would not?
Not unless they had been scanned like with a CT scanner or something like that. And then you can make virtual models from CT scans. I used a structured light scanner from clean bones to create my 3D models. So it just kind of, it would depend. You know, if you wanted to use a structured light scanner, you'd want to have clean bones, but you could use CT scans and convert them into 3D models as well.
What does your family and friends think about that work? Do you talk about that during parties? Is that a conversation piece or not?
Oh, not really. They think it sounds really cool on paper, but then when I try to explain it, they just kind of glaze over and then they change the topic.
What's your recommendation once the glaze comes up? Do you already know that you should better switch the topic and change the topic, or did you ever try to convince them that it's something they should dig deeper into?
I try to talk about the broader applications of it, the humanitarian reasons why you might want to sort commingled human remains, and the importance of identifying them to return to the families, and those kind of broader issues that I think everybody can understand regardless of an education in forensics.
Let's say somebody is very young and wants to be a forensic anthropologist. Would you say that this is really tedious nerd work, or would you say, well, since there are broader applications, it's something that is also very social and good for the society?
Right. It's definitely very social. For me, this is my way of wanting to contribute to the general population. I think it's really important to identify remains and repatriate them back to their families, and being able to give them that closure that, yes, this is your person and these are, all the remains we could identify. So for me, that's what drew me into this field, and it's what keeps me going today, in spite of the long amount of time I've been working to get my degrees.
So are you going to be a forensic anthropologist in 10 or 20 years? What do you think? Or are there other possibilities to apply that, let's say in a hospital environment or something like that?
Maybe not with this specific research in a hospital. Generally, you know who the person is at that
You're not disassembled in a hospital.
Yes, you're so big. But I do hope to, at least in 10, 20 years, have my PhD at that point, and then, go along and continue to be a forensic anthropologist, or at least work tangentially working with humanitarian organizations, things like that.
Yes, we wish you very good luck, and I know how much work this is, so if you want to be a forensic anthropologist, you need to be a nerd, even though she thinks she's not, but it's probably necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, we're here at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences meeting, and this is Dave, who cracked the Zodiac Killer code. Watch his YouTube videos. You said you are doing more encryptions. Which ones are these going to be in the next years? Probably, because you were not really saying what you're doing.
Well, some of it has to do with them. I've got some stuff for them that I'm looking at.
So crime-related stuff.
Crime-related, yeah, some crime-related ones. And the remaining two, there's still some interesting ideas that we could try out on those, but I'm not too hopeful about those. But I like to keep up with progress in other unsolved mysteries like the Voynich Manuscript and things like that.
What's your guess on the Voynich Manuscript? Because most Germans think it's just random stuff, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's evidence of at least some kind of systematic process in creating it.
Which type of patterns did you see until now? Or won't you?
I don't know. I haven't studied it that. I'm kind of watching from a distance and seeing what people are saying about it. Like there's some linguistic things in it, but it's unusual because of the way. Like it doesn't quite line up with certain languages, but other languages it lines up better, like Arabic and things like that. So that kind of stuff's pretty interesting.
What would you say to younger people who are starting like you, just getting involved into an old criminal case, true crime and stuff, and then spending 15 years to crack it? Would you recommend it to your kids? Or
I would say be very, very careful, because we got very lucky, and in a lot of these kind of cases, they just go on forever without any satisfying end. So you have to be mindful of that. You have to also be careful which paths you go down, because you might end up wasting a bunch of time. And a lot of people did waste time in this case.
Like the meme guy that you mentioned.
Yes.
Right? Wow. You said you used a lot of computer programming, talking to other people. You used Java. Another person used BASIC or Quick BASIC. What's it called?
Free BASIC, maybe Power BASIC, something like that.
Do you think that this is going to be the direction in the future, to use a lot of computer power and throw that on those cases? Because I realized you used a lot of intuition, even though you don't say it, but you did. For example, you saw some parts standing out, and So how much intuition is still necessary in the future?
I think it really depends on the problem. This was a very unique problem. There aren't many problems like the Zodiac 340 cipher. There's some that are kind of in the same category, transposition ciphers, where they can't figure out what the transposition is. And so one of the things you can do is build tools that can put unknown ciphers into different categories. And I think that's important, because most of the work in solving the cipher is identifying what kind it is. So if you have something you're looking at, an experienced script analyst can go, oh, that's probably substitution. That's probably transposition.
She's from the FBI sitting behind us. Yeah. But did I understand correctly? You got 650,000 blocks of solutions that were sent to you by a colleague. Which type of program did you use for that?
So
you said you used batches to feed this into your program. How on earth is that working?
Well, that's one of the nice features of Jarl's program. Like, he built that because he was doing the same thing. He was creating a bunch of different tests, and each test is a rearrangement of the 340. So it's just the symbols rearranged in a different way. Then feeding that into the software would try to treat it as a regular old substitution cipher and come up with the key.
But how do you just feed it in? I mean, how do you do that?
Oh, you just throw them all in one directory, and you tell it they're in that directory, and you make a little file, like a configuration file that says what they are, and then you click the button and you just wait, and it'll spit out the results in a different directory, and it has a score on each one. So you look at the ones that are high scoring.
The score is how much does it resemble actual language, right?
Yes, it's like a fast estimate of the quality of the readability of the message.
Okay, last two questions. How much of a nerd do you have to be to do that work? Do you think it's very nerdy, or do you think it's
it's very nerdy.
It's very nerdy. He's a software programmer, right? That's your job.
It's very nerdy. You don't. Yeah, there's a lot of nerds doing code breaking.
And final question: you mentioned your family. Are they super proud of their, of you?
Yeah, I think so. They also, if it hadn't turned out this way, they probably would be really tired of it, and they occasionally still.
But do they ask you? Did they ask you in between, like after 5 years, after 10 years, like how's it going? Explain us something, or are they like, oh God?
Well, luckily for me, I was starting to get invited to different conferences, even though we didn't have a solution yet. I was still able to go out and talk about it, and it gave some validation that what I was doing was actually mattering.
Did you mean to your family also?
Yeah. That it's good for my career. It's good for professional life and things.
But was it good for your career, because you have your own business probably, or you're working as a software programmer and you're employed?
Yeah,
did it help you?
I think it helps. Yeah, I think it's like attacking any other problem. If you approach it the right way, it's you're more likely to succeed. If you like in software development, you have a problem and you're trying to come up with the best path to the solution to the problem. And so working on 340 kind of sharpened my skills in the other areas too.
So, and on the very day you realized that you got it, what did you do in that moment? Like become super quiet, super focused and concentrated, or just bursting out and throwing the coffee mug through the office?
So I jumped out of my chair, I yelled, "Holy shit!" and startled my dog, because I'm in my office with my dog all the time. And the dog was like, "What's going on?" And then I started pacing around, and feel my heart beating.
In the office?
In the office, yeah. And so for so many years, I've had close to that feeling before, thinking that I was on the right track, but I shut all that down like years ago, because most of the time you hit a brick wall. Oh, that didn't work, and that didn't work. So I was like skeptical of everything until I saw that phrase, that was me on the TV show, and that's when I knew. And so I couldn't be skeptical anymore. It was impossible to be skeptical.
And then you just wrote an email to the FBI, or you ran
after
to your
we cleaned
family?
it up. After we cleaned it up, it took a few days. We had that first part of the cipher solved, but we were running into those problems with the rest of it. And we're like, oh, we're so close, but I think we'll get some sleep now. I have to deal with work and regular responsibilities while sitting on a potential big solve. And then eventually we were able to clean it up. Jarl helped us a lot with that second section. We were all kind of working on it together.
The FBI did help you?
Oh no, Jarl.
The other guy. The Belgian guy.
Yeah.
Watch his video. You will learn more about the other guys. Yeah.
Yes. Let's Crack Zodiac. Go check it out. He looked at it, and he had encountered that kind of problem before in his tests, when his idea was maybe there was some mistake in the transposition process. So he was crafting his experiments kind of around that idea. So he recognized what was going on because of that. And so he was like, oh, just shift this line. It fixes everything. Perfect. And skipping the life is.
That's very interesting. You will see it in this video. To move a complete line a little bit to the side and then switch the H. What's with the H? Do you have any idea? Do you think
I don't
that
know what
happened while he was rearranging everything?
It might be, yeah. He had a misalignment when if he had cut it out in shapes or something, and then he was writing the message and he had it misaligned. It could be, or he had another copy of it written, and he was just transcribing it, and he was off by one. He didn't want to rewrite it, so and he just stuck the H at the end. I got this misalignment. Could be something like that.
Have you been a true crime buff all your life when you were a kid or something?
Not really, no. Kind of a little bit, but it was really the cipher that drew me in.
Join the forensic community, watch his videos. Thank you very, very, very much for your work and your talk. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We heard about bones, but now we are talking about DNA. So, what's your name?
Yesenia.
Hello, Yesenia. Is that spelled correct?
Yes.
Did I say it correctly? So, you are from DNA lab, obviously, and DNA, there are changes on the DNA that you cannot see by sequencing the DNA. So, you're looking at something else.
Yeah.
What is it?
So yeah, we're looking at DNA methylation. And,
Can you explain that for kids?
Yes. So sometimes there's these changes in our DNA that can change the expression. So it can turn certain genes on and off. So, but this doesn't change our DNA sequence. We're looking at these small changes to see whether or not we can estimate the age of someone. So
of a living person. So this is not for blood from a dead person or for a pool of blood?
This is blood from a deceased individual.
Ah.
Yes.
How long can you be dead so that your method is still working?
Ooh, good question.
You want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So the samples that we looked at, I think the range of time since death was around 2.5 to 4 years, and so we actually received the samples at a later point too. So
and these were samples on paper, or which types of samples were these? The age samples?
So these were casework samples from the Los Angeles County Department
but
of...
in a tube or on paper?
Oh, these are extracts, DNA extracts. Yes.
Ah, I see.
Yes.
So you received pure DNA, so to speak,
Yes.
swimming in a liquid. Okay, and then that would be the step that you didn't do. Somebody else did that,
Yes.
the DNA extraction.
Exactly.
Then you got the tube, and then what did you do?
So yeah, from here we quantified first to determine how much DNA is there. Then we added chemicals, and that helps convert the bases. So that's part of the methodology. And then after that, we try to determine the amount of converted or non-converted bases in sequences.
By burning the DNA, pyrosequencing.
Right. So that's an interesting name, but it's actually more referring to the amount of light that's produced. And so we measure the amount of light based on the amount of nucleotides added to the sequence of interest.
And could you determine the age, and how close did you get to the actual age of the person, of which you knew the age, right?
Yes.
So you knew the age, so
Yes.
you could test if you were right or wrong.
Yeah, so over here you can see the results. So we had two different sets, our training set over here and the test set. And we found that for the training set, the average deviation from the actual age is about 7.6 years. In the test set, it was similar, 7.4 years. And so what we also found is that as the actual chronological age of the donors increased, then the accuracy decreased. So you have the widening and the decrease in accuracy.
Do you think that's due to bad habits, like no sports, eating fatty food, smoking or something? Or,
Yeah.
do you know? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That is so.
Smoking or not maintaining a healthy lifestyle can change your methylation levels.
It can even be changed by stress whilst you're in the womb of your mother, right? So that can also change the methylation pattern. So if you want to be identified correctly, you better eat healthy and you don't smoke. Did you enjoy the work? Was it fun?
Yeah.
How much
definitely.
oh, you're looking. How much fun was it?
It was very fun. It was right before during the pandemic started, 2020, and we were able to push all of this research through.
Oh, you mean you were a lot in the laboratory since you couldn't get out in the street?
We were locked inside the lab.
Very good. This is the best that can happen to you as a lab worker. So no social contact, just lab work. How long were your hours per day?
Kind of like an 8-hour day, I would say.
Oh, so that was good.
Yeah.
Yours was also an 8-hour day.
Yeah, we were working together.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was okay then. Very nice results. If you're interested, just contact the both of you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. DNA again, but this time it's not about methylation. It's about touch DNA and the persistence of DNA.
Yeah.
So I had a case in which a guy read the newspapers, gave it to his neighbor. His neighbor was killed, and then the DNA of the other neighbor who had read the newspaper first was convicted of the crime because the DNA of him was now on the victim. But he said he was never at his neighbor's. He just put the newspaper on the doorstep. Do you believe that?
Absolutely. Actually, part of my results kind of shows that. So here for participant D, we noted for the we separated each ruler that the participant held in 9 segments. So that's what this table is showing. In participant D specifically, the 4th and 8th segments, when they were ran as single sources, they were excluded from the sample. But when the same segments were ran as 2 or more sources, they were included in that sample because of foreign DNA. So because of the way that touch DNA works, that is something that is very possible and actually happens constantly in the field.
We just heard in a talk just an hour ago that even on bullet cases you can have touch DNA and it's mixed all the time.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with all the mixtures? I mean, are you just using computer programs, or do you determine a threshold level for every single case by yourself? How do you do that?
For my study specifically, we use StarMix to kind of discuss those likelihood ratios of how likely it was that that person contributed to their sample. And we also observed their electropherograms. So for example, most of the samples that we took, it was only detectable to see one person contributing to that sample, and it was generally that participant's DNA that was added to that. But in this electropherogram here, you can see that there are 3 different alleles detected in different spots, so that's clear that there's a mixture.
One person can only have 2 alleles at one point, so yeah. So how did you deal with that?
We just noted it. The point of this poster is just to detect the inconsistencies of transfer and touch DNA in that and in a forensic setting. So it is likely that even when you know that there's only one contributor to a sample, because we didn't control for people washing their hands beforehand, we clearly see that there was foreign DNA deposited that did not belong to the participant that was still deposited on the rulers that they handled.
Same with the shell casings. Even though these were fresh shell casings that were fired once, there was DNA of several persons on the casings. Nobody knows why. So do you want to continue this path? Because it's probably going to cause nightmares for you, because all this touching and mixing.
Right. It might, but I think it's very important to have these conversations, to discuss with the public and everybody willing to listen within and outside of the field that these cases can happen. DNA and the systems that we use are very sensitive and can help us solve crimes and all of these things, but it can also make it very difficult, and I think that's something that needs to be very transparent when discussing touch DNA and how it affects the criminal process.
How do you take care of your DNA so that when you're riding a bus, not all your DNA is everywhere, and then you get accused of a crime that happens 2 hours later? Do you have any suggestions?
Use hand sanitizer and try to touch as least amount of surfaces as possible.
How about the skin flakes that are falling down?
That's just, you can't help it. You just hope that
use
nobody
cream,
near
maybe
you
cream.
committed a crime.
Use cream and a hairnet. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Hello, we saw a lot of people from universities, but this says U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. Are you a military person?
We work in conjunction a lot with the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. One of the people that graduated from my research lab went on to work there, so we do a lot of collaborations with them. So I work at FIU as a graduate student, and she works on my committee.
The person who would be standing here, the other person?
No, this is my project.
This is your project. In most countries, people have absolutely no idea what's going on here concerning the fentanyl, because you were working on that. Could you maybe explain for people who are not from the United States what the very severe problem in the United States is concerning fentanyl? Because in all other countries, this is just used in care for elderly people who are terminally ill or something like that. Not in the United States.
As of right now, fentanyl is one of the leading causes in overdoses between people the ages of 18 to 25. It is 100 times more potent than that of morphine. So the smallest dose, the less than a grain of rice in size, can actually very easily cause an overdose. And a lot of time, not only is it, you find it mixed in with heroin, so a lot of times some people don't even know that they're taking it. And then they end up overdosing on what they would normally shoot up when it comes to heroin. In the United States, we have a huge opium epidemic, a huge drug epidemic, and with fentanyl being a synthetic opioid, it's very much a prevalent part of that issue right now, where we find most overdoses coming from illegal fentanyl.
Is this the reason why you chose the topic, or were you interested in opioids or chemistry since you were a little kid, so to speak?
Well, I've always been interested in science since I was a child, but I saw the bad things drugs can do to your hometown, and that made me very interested in doing this kind of research. I also love canines, so that's why I went into more of a canine area of it, because we do a lot of canine work in my lab too.
So that means using dogs to sniff out a drug, right?
Exactly. So it kind of like helped me sandwich two of my passions into one career move.
Do you have a dog, and does it smell? Can it detect drugs?
I do have a dog, but no, he can't detect drugs. Although the people in my research lab always joke that I should train him to detect drugs.
Can your dog detect cookies?
100%. I open the thing, he's running like no one's business.
We were walking around Seattle, like downtown, in the past days, and we saw so many people who were in the middle of the street selling stolen goods, couldn't keep their balance, even in the middle of the target market, just like were behaving totally erratic. So they were probably on opioids. Do I get that right, or what was going on there?
You can't 100% say what they were taking, but it's also not a non-possibility. So you can't 100% say that they were on drugs or they were drunk or something like that, but it is a possibility that they were on some kind of drug. Without obviously testing or doing any of that kind of stuff, you can't really tell, but the opioid epidemic is very much prevalent in the United States. It's very much a problem. It started back in the 80s with cocaine, and then it's just grown and grown and grown and grown and grown into what it is today. Actually, there's a CDC statistic that always really hits home with me. From 2013 to 2019, is actually in here somewhere in the poster. There was like an increase of 45% in overdose rates, with more than half of that coming from fentanyl.
Which experience did you make in your hometown, since you were mentioning that? Did you just see friends of yours dying from opioids?
No, more people in my school. When I was in high school, we had a number of overdoses my senior year of high school. And I was already going into a degree in forensic science for my undergrad. And then when I got here and I saw some of the research they did, it really hit home as I watched through social media my hometown become more and more and more and more of the way that it was going. It just hit home a little bit, and I'm like, all right, this is my chance to do something about it. This is my chance.
Is this one of the famous towns?
No,
do you want to say which one?
No, I don't want to say which town it is.
But there are even movies about particular towns in which the opioid crisis really nearly wiped out the social and economical life of certain towns. So it's not that bad in your hometown,
probably. It's not that bad in my hometown, but it's a difference from when I was growing up to now. And
so it's gotten worse?
It's gotten worse from growing up to now. I'm not going to mention it. I don't want to throw them under the bus. I love everybody from my town, but it's definitely gotten worse as I got older, and it's definitely something that I wanted to help make a difference in. I wanted to help decrease these overdose numbers. I wanted to help make something that will eventually help decrease the flow of traffic of fentanyl into this country, because it is the most prevalent drug right now. And through the use of canine mimics, we can eventually get there.
So I see that you're really interested also in the dog thing. So in a few years, would you prefer to be on the dog side or on the laboratory side?
Honestly depends on what goes on. I have a year left of grad school, so I'm actually looking for a job now. It just depends on where I end up, but either way, it's still helping the same goal for my life goal, which is to help decrease this opioid epidemic in the US.
Thank you very much. We wish you very good luck. It's horrible. The only time in my whole life that I saw a forensic person crying was the head of the largest toxicology lab a few years ago on stage when he was reporting the numbers that you were talking about. I've never seen that, not in the autopsy room, not in a crime scene, never. It was a toxicologist. Thank you very much.
No problem, thank you.
We had DNA, we had toxicology, now we come to the most beautiful discipline, forensic entomology. Do you also think it's the most beautiful one?
It's definitely interesting. I have my moments. I definitely focus a lot more on bones and anthropology, but I also find this super interesting, which is how I landed here.
You mean your moments, you mean like your happy moments with insects and decomposition, or your disgust moments?
More the disgust, yeah. no, they're really interesting. It's cool to watch them go through their cycles, but definitely there's some gross moments for sure.
So she's a bone person, obviously. How did you get into the decomposition part?
So we were doing just a whole experiment to determine the timeline for decomposition in the Sonoran Desert. The Sonoran Desert is extremely dry.
Is it cold at night? Or
very cold at night, yeah. So it can range anywhere of 59 degree change, basically. So even in these pictures, you can see that we ranged from 66 all the way back up to 106 at noon.
That would be 15 degrees Celsius to 48 degrees Celsius.
Yes, yeah. So it's quite a big change. So what we noticed is that the temperatures throughout the day were roughly the same. There's not a big enough difference overall to really determine that that's the difference. But if you look at the pictures, you have insect activity all around the torso. This is right before sunrise on both pictures, at noon, and then at night right after the sun has set.
Did you produce a stab wound?
We did not. That happened just naturally. The pig, totally opened up on us. And then, so you have insects around the torso, a little bit around the head, and then here there's a little bit under the arm, but for the most part they've now disappeared. They've gone into the pig, under the pig, away from the pig. And on this last picture here, you can see they've kind of taken over the entire torso. They're all back out. They're very active.
It's a maggot carpet. That's a beautiful word. Maybe you could show that. There's a maggot carpet here. Yeah.
There is. It's very gross. And then on this other side here in the shade, you have the maggots all around the head, around the torso. This is the middle of the day now, and we're still around the torso and around the head. And then at night, we're still around the torso and around the head. So all day, and then here you're only seeing them when the sun is not really present. So what we were able to determine is that it looks as though temperature is not the only driving factor in the activity that we saw. Previously, it was determined that it was like heat stress and things like that would cause the insects to die, and we just didn't find the same results. Honestly.
So what do you think? What is it? Sunlight? It's just like
sunlight. The UV index.
Maggots don't like sunlight.
Yeah, we have extreme sunlight, anywhere between 9 and 10 on a scale of 0 to 11.
But you're so pale. How do you protect yourself?
I know. I stay inside a lot.
But really, how do you do that? Do you use like strong protection?
A lot of hats. Wearing long sleeves. I wore long sleeves and hats every single time I went out here.
Because this lady here has the same problem. She's also very pale. So yeah.
Definitely recommend a hat, some sunscreen, things like that.
Did you grow up in the desert, or how?
I did. I grew up in Arizona in this climate my whole life, so I'm used to it. But most people can't deal with it. Getting up into 120-ish degrees or around like 46 degrees Celsius, it's pretty warm.
How did you get into that? Because like 20 years ago, forensic entomology, so the insects were the cool part and the interesting part, but you're a little bit disgusted. So how did you find your way into the topic?
Right. So I started doing research under my anthropology professor, and she was able to kind of guide me into her research project, which was studying decomposition. She works with the medical examiner's office, and there's not really any data for determining postmortem intervals. So that's where we ended up in this research. And I was just kind of ready for anything that it could throw at me, so I went for it.
Would you want to be a coroner later? Because then you would have to deal with probably a lot of decomposition, or would you like to stay in the laboratory and have it nice and clean?
I'll probably go with anthropology, but anthropology within the medical examiner's office. There's still some very gross
You will get decomposed corpses. Do you have a lot of mummies and dried out corpses, or does it always go like this? So you don't have the pure mummy, the pure drying out. How does it go in your area?
I mean, you can get both. What we're seeing is this kind of almost looks mummified. I don't want to say that it's mummified. I'm not the one to determine that, but it turned into almost like a gusher, which is really gross to explain.
Interesting.
Very dry on the outside, very moist on the inside. So
why do you call it a gusher?
like the gummies. Have you seen like the little gummies that have the liquid on the inside? That's the best way for me to explain it and have everyone understand.
No, but that's interesting because that's probably something that's due to that specific climate there.
Exactly, yeah. That extreme change in temperature really, and the sun just being so intense all the time. We rarely ever have clouds and there's really no rain. We get monsoon seasons where we get extreme amounts of rain at one time and then it's gone.
So, did you collect the insects and send them to somebody, or were you not so much interested in which particular insects these specifically were?
We weren't, but we do have an entomology department at ASU with us, and they were supposed to be coming out and collecting samples. I don't know that it ever happened. But
They were supposed to.
Yes.
So, final question: what do you do? Let's say somebody is talking to you and saying like, "Hey, I'm under the impression you don't open up enough to me." Do you think of such a corpse then?
No.
Or are you still able to open up in a friendly, normal way without thinking of decomposition?
Yeah, I don't have to.
You don't have to.
I can turn it off.
You can turn it off. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is something that came up this year, probably in full blast. It's about the transgender, let's not say problem, but when you see a corpse, then probably you don't know which gender that is.
Right.
We saw gender neutral restrooms here. That was also something that was new.
Yeah.
But why is that a problem in forensics? Usually I go there, I take a DNA sample, then I know if this is male or female.
Right.
So what's the problem?
So one of the problems with DNA specifically is that we assume that everyone has either an XX or an XY chromosome, which is not always the case. There are intersex people. There are more than, I think, there's definitely more than a dozen, potentially more than 20 like different chromosomal variations. And so that's one thing to think about. The other thing is just that on human remains, we can't always tell someone's gender. Not everyone has gender confirmation surgery, but by going by only genitalia, we risk misgendering them, not identifying individuals because we're not using their correct name, their correct pronouns.
So, for example, somebody could look for, let's say, male 40 years old, but no male 40 years old is missing because
they're transgender and they go by a different name and use different clothing and things like that. And so just making sure that we're being more inclusionary rather than exclusionary in our methods, and just lessening the harm that we do to the population.
And also, even if you're not interested in the whole problem, let's say on a social level, you must be, because we're a forensic society and a criminalistic society.
Exactly. We are forensic scientists and we work for the decedents that we analyze and that we try to identify or offer information on. And so we owe this to this population to make sure that we are giving them our best science that we can.
So what are these? I'm reading about these databases that you're referring to.
Yes.
So which information is in those databases?
Yep. So Transgender Day of Remembrance works with also Transgender Europe and a few other collective community-led databases. And so what they do is they look online, they look for social media posts, petitions, police reports, missing persons reports, and they basically crowdsource all of this information to put it into a database. And so it's often activists, members from the communities, academics, forensic scientists. It's kind of very inclusionary in the way that this database is built because everyone is looking for this information, and it doesn't risk the exclusion of someone being misgendered in like a government database or things like that, because there is no standardized database currently for us to track these decedents.
So is this a database for dead persons or for live persons?
So it's only for deceased individuals, and it's only for deceased individuals that died by like unnatural causes. So you can see here, like interpersonal violence is the most common cause of death for these decedents. And this word cloud shows some of the most prominent words used throughout the entire database. So a lot of individuals are shot or are stabbed or are beaten. Unfortunately, they're really brutal hate crimes that happen to a lot of these individuals that end up in medical examiners and coroners' offices.
Yes, there's a lot of, I don't know, nobody understands, or at least I don't understand the hate that especially transgender persons have to suffer from.
Yeah, and it's worldwide, and it's horrible. It's really, really heinous. hatred that the community faces.
So how did you stumble across that topic? Were you interested in that for a longer time, or was it just a project that was assigned to you?
No, not at all. So while I was doing my master's, I started to notice kind of some of the discrepancies in sex estimation, even just in my own analyses, and realizing that, I'm not quite sure, and I'm not quite sure if I want to put this individual into a box without being 100%. And then I kind of also went on my own gender journey, and I am a non-binary forensic anthropologist. And so kind of connecting my science and my community led me to here. And then I found out about the database, and it's open source. And I had an undergrad who wanted to help with the project. And so now here we are, and this funnels into my dissertation as well.
Which type of identification did you do when you found out that it was difficult to assign a gender? Are you a forensic pathologist or a DNA person?
I'm an anthropologist.
So
I'm an anthropologist, so I look at the bones specifically. And so our methods typically have male, female, or ambiguous. And I often found that I was nervous about putting them in a male or female category if it wasn't like overwhelmingly expressive of the traits that we use to identify that. And then as I started putting people in the ambiguous category, I felt, well, this is kind of dehumanizing to them, right? Because now that's one less thing that we know about them, and we're just putting them in a random category. Yeah. And ambiguous categories in anthro literature and in bioarc often get excluded from samples. So if we have a sample that's 50% ambiguous and someone wants to do a sex study, they might just get rid of the ambiguous skulls completely, right? So it's a big ongoing issue throughout all of forensics and in anthro specifically.
As a biologist, I would just throw out gender completely out of the forensic context. What as an anthropologist, what do you think about that? Now, of course, we need to, focus on that so people realize that there are different genders. But do you think that's at least would be my solution? It would be possible solution just throw out that category of gender? Or?
Yeah, I think the problem with that is that, like we said, that runs into issues where maybe they didn't identify as a male, but we say we have a missing male decedent, and now no one identifies them because they don't consider them a male.
No, but
right?
what if you don't have gender at all anymore? You just say it's a missing person, this and that features, and there we go. I mean, that would be my solution, not talk about gender at all.
Right. I think, I don't know, as anthros, one thing that we've taken to doing is just connecting biology and culture so that we take more of a biocultural approach to our analysis so that we can consider what cultural influences may have been at play for gender. But I do see what you're saying. I think it would be not well received to cut it out completely, right? Okay, but I do also just think that gender is important and it is part of someone's lived identity, and so I don't want to erase that from them after death. So I think that finding better ways to be more inclusive and to incorporate that into our analyses really does well on behalf of the decedents.
I see. So another aspect of inclusion to respect that the person during their lifetime that this was part of their identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
We both, did you also have the Celebrate Diversity ribbon? What? That's the final question, I promise. How did that come up at the conference?
I think the past few years there's been a lot of talk about diversity in different realms, right? There's diversity in terms of including more women, more people of color, more BIPOC people, and also gender. And so I think that this is kind of just the next topic that people are starting to say, okay, we're working on inclusivity, now let's talk about the next thing, right? So I think that, it's just important, and I think that being able to bring it all together is great.
The truth is that the society was sometimes a little bit conservative before, so we are trying to break ground a little bit. She doesn't want to say it, but I'm saying it.
I'm still a grad student.
I'm saying it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Final poster for today. We had toxicology, we had DNA, but now we have an X-File case, a very surprising case. So, what's your name?
My name is Ashley Holmes.
And which institution do you work for?
I'm with Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
And you got a case where you found a skull. It totally looks 100% like a human skull.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I'm a biologist, so I say 100%. Anthropologists wouldn't probably say that. But there's a story behind it.
There is a story. So the story behind Scully is the story that A skull was found at the bottom of a pond that was being drained by construction workers.
How deep was the pond?
Unsure of the depth of the pond, but they were actually draining the pond because they were going to be putting real estate on top of the pond. Law enforcement was called out to the scene. Law enforcement remembered that there was a child that was missing 10 years prior in the area, and that these could potentially be the skeletal remains of said child. So they contacted our office. They requested a skeletal remain examination be performed, and Scully was brought to our office. An examination was performed. Dr. Patrick Lance, this is his case. He was the one that did the examination. As you can see in image 1 and 2, there was a lot of mud that was obscuring the details of said skull, but once the mud was washed away, you start to look at the cranial sutures, you start to look at the dentition, and Dr. Lance was very skeptical that this was a human skull. The nail in the coffin, so to speak, was when we had radiology come and they did images, and this is the image that you can see. There's a lack of a trabecular bone, there are no frontal or maxillary sinuses, and there are no middle ear canals.
Oh, can you maybe say that in plain words for non-scientists? What is missing here?
Okay, so frontal sinuses, there's no frontal sinuses in this area, and there are no middle ear canals.
So here something's missing here and
yes,
there.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And if you look at the dentition right here, there's a tan glossy finish as well. That is not conducive to dentition from human remains. So our conclusion is that this was a very impressive 3D mold that was made of a skull. Someone actually took the time to probably use a Dremel drill to do the sutures right here.
Like with a little drill?
Exactly.
Jesus.
Exactly. To this day, we do not know why the skull was produced and then thrown in the pond, but hence how we have Scully, an investigation of X-Files proportion.
If you are the person who produced the skull, send an email to the investigators because they're probably interested.
Yes, please do.
I personally think this is an alien. How can you exclude it as an alien?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Yeah. So if you have information about aliens without frontal sinuses, also send an email. Thank you very much. I mean, how long did it take you to find out that this could by no means be a human skull?
Typically the examination is like an hour and a half, but as soon as we got the imaging from radiology, you instantly knew. I mean, you have to remember, when you're dealing with people that are lay people and they don't have a background in anthropology, if I found this at the bottom of a pond, I would probably think that it was real too.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
Yes.
So this is really strange. So whoever did that, you did a job that made it into a poster at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences meeting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Not only do we have researchers of mostly young age, as we showed you before, we also have companies who are selling products that are already beyond research because they are, they're good, they work. And you have a beautiful example for this. This is a system to find sperm heads mostly, and they are difficult to find. I'm not going into that, but it's a pain. It is a total pain. But we are talking about the solution here.
That's right, because most of the labs, the backlog comes with the sexual assault is finding the sperm. If you can't find the sperm, you can't go to DNA. So what we have here is just a fluorescent microscope with phase. So it's not all that different, but what we want to do is find the sperm. And when there's hospital smear slides, it's very hard to find the sperm in a...
Let me explain this quickly.
I'm sorry.
So for example, you get a swab, let's say from oral cavity or vaginal, anal, and then probably there's sperm, and then you smear it on top of a little glass plate. So, and when you look through the microscope, you see that. Let's try to spot some sperm. Ines, where would you think that you see a sperm in there, a sperm head?
No.
Give it a try. No way?
I think here, maybe here, but...
Okay, maybe here.
Maybe there.
Here. Okay. So let's look and see.
So let's look and see.
Let's see. We think we might have found one. Let's see how fast we can see. So now I'm going to fluorescence. I'm turning on. This is going to identify the sperm heads.
And before that, you already did something to our smear.
Yes.
You put some invisible
yes.
substance.
This was an immunofluorescent staining.
No sperm.
That was not a sperm head.
No.
But there are many others.
Oh, it might be.
It might be
just lower in the plane of focus.
So every green dot here is a sperm head.
every green can be confirmed as being nuclear positive is a sperm. So first we'll differentiate between the sperm and all the other nuclei, which stains blue. So bacteria and epithelial cells.
Vaginal epithelial cells, for example, oral
right, buccal
cells.
Absolutely. So what we want to see, if this is a sperm, it's going to stain with nuclear positive. And that's what we want to do. We confirm, so we have not just a histological stain that identifies nuclear positive. This identifies sperm, you can confirm it, and you can still find morphology. Oops. Let's see.
And take a photo that this is an actual sperm head and present it to the court.
Absolutely.
When you were a kid, did you ever imagine that you would end up with a sperm detection system, fluorescent sperm detection system? Was that something you were interested in?
I never thought I'd be looking at glowing sperm for my life's ambition.
You didn't. But what were you interested in? In chemistry or in biology or nothing of that at all?
Actually, no, I wasn't a big science, but I had a little stereo microscope when I was little.
What did you watch, like bird feathers or something like that? What did you put on the microscope?
Oh, hairs, bird feather, pond scum, everything.
So if you have kids, make them curious about science, because one day it's gonna help solving complicated cases, not only cases where people die, but also all the sexual assault cases, because this is what we see most, like violence at home and sexual assault cases. There you go. So thank you very, very much.
It was nice to meet you. Can I give you a button?
Yeah.